Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much for joining today. We have a very timely and relevant topic to talk about today. So appreciate you taking a half hour out of your lunch break to join us, and we're really looking forward to this session. Today we're joined by CGCN, which is a top advocacy and strategic communications firm in DC. And we're going to be talking about what the year ahead looks like from a policy and politics perspective, which has become near and dear to people's hearts, if not toward the end of last year, certainly within the last couple of days. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about policy, talking about the political realities of that policy, and we are happy to take questions throughout. This is a broad and varied topic, and people have different lenses that they view it through. So we are happy to take any and all questions that you might have as we go through the session today. A couple of small housekeeping items for those questions. We'll take those through the Zoom Q&A window. You can submit those throughout the session. Some of them we may choose to integrate into the conversation. Some of those we may save for Q&A at the end. We are going to allow a little time at the end of today's session in the event that Q&A makes us run over a little bit. We want to make sure we have time to address most, if not all, of the questions that come up. Please go and sign up for our newsletter. We do a session every week, Thursdays at noon, different topics every week, and some of them may interest you. Some of them, of course, may not. But if you sign up for our newsletter, you'll get the notifications in advance and get the chance to register for these sessions. And we encourage you to reach out. These are informational webinars. There's only so much depth we can go to in 30 minutes. So we'll give you the contact information on the next slide of everybody on the webinar. And if you have further questions or if any of this interests you specifically for your business or trade groups, please feel free to reach out directly. So for today's panel, very excited to be joined by Sam and Scott from CGCN. Sam, would you like to do a little intro for yourself?
That'd be great. Thanks, Steve. Appreciate being here. Hope everyone has a happy new year and had a happy holiday. The CGCN group is a kind of full service Republican strategic consulting lobbying firm. We have 9 partners at the shop that do kind of shoe leather lobbying of lawmakers, mostly in the administration or up on Capitol Hill. And then we have a strategic communications practice run by Mitt Romney's former campaign manager and Mitch McConnell's former communications director that help us put together issue advocacy campaigns to help win issues on behalf of our clients. My name is Sam Geduldig. I'm the co-CEO. We founded the firm about 14, 15 years ago. And my experience was as John Boehner's political director before he became speaker, way before actually, back in '97. I traveled the country with him, watched him build a political network of donors and relationships with his members of Congress. And ultimately, obviously, it worked out where that network helped him become speaker. I did a little 2-year stint at the House Financial Services Committee working for Chairman Mike Oxley, who I know the Citrin guys know real well. At least they know his legislation. And I worked a little bit on building coalitions to help pass that bill, Sarbanes-Oxley and Patriot Act and others after 9/11. And the last 4 years of my career on Capitol Hill, I worked for the majority whip, Roy Blunt, who's now a senator from Missouri. He worked very closely with the business community in trying to pass legislation that George W. Bush would ultimately sign into law, and I worked on a lot of the business coalitions there. That's my background. I've been a lobbyist ever since I left Capitol Hill, and I've been doing this 14 years. And I'd like to introduce Scott Riplinger, who's our newest partner and comes straight out of Senator Crapo's office.
Thanks, Sam. Really appreciate that and appreciate everyone joining today. As Sam sort of mentioned, I'm the newest partner at CGCN. Just came off Capitol Hill and spent 15 years up there. Sam talked about I'm more of a policy person that led legislative teams. Sam mentioned Senator Crapo, who's going to be the top Republican leader on the Senate Finance Committee. He's currently the chairman of the Senate Banking Committee. Prior to that, I was with Senator Dean Heller of Nevada. Did a lot of committee work for him, did the Senate Banking Committee, ran the Security Subcommittee, did some work in the Senate Commerce Committee, was all over the place on policies that of those last 10 years, healthcare, tax reform, banking reform, and spent a lot of time in the weeds on those issues. So we're really excited, Sam and I, to be here today to walk through, especially with everything that's happened in the last couple of days, sort of what the political dynamics going to be, especially coming out of the gate here and with the new administration and with the Georgia elections having been resolved. So we'll dive right in here, Steve.
That's great. Thanks a lot, guys. So, the first thing, we were going to open up with, of course, is talking a little bit about what the policy priorities of the new administration probably look like as things change over in Washington. I think we thought the Georgia runoffs this week would give us one interesting flashpoint to talk about, and then the last 2 days happened. So maybe can you guys open up with addressing what we think those legislative priorities are, and what, if anything, has shifted as a result of this week's events?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I don't know Joe Biden at all, and I don't pretend to, but I think, just having watched the campaign as close as I have, I really believe he would like his kind of tombstone to read that he helped bring the country together, not further divide it. And I still think, and I thought before this, that there would be some pressure on the left to ram, a more progressive agenda through a 50-50 Senate with Kamala Harris breaking ties, and Pelosi, obviously has a majority, but it's pretty thin. I really think Biden after yesterday is going to really try to avoid narrow 50-50 votes with tiebreakers. I think he's going to want to focus on things that bring Republicans to the table. The things that we talk about that are the kind of the easiest low-hanging fruit, I think, is obviously a COVID relief package, which I think they're going to have to do something very quickly when Biden comes in. And I think it'll be robust. I think, Mitch McConnell has mentioned liability protections in exchange for state aid. In the old days, that was a bitter fight. I have a hard time seeing the trial bar be very successful in standing in the way of $2,000 checks. And I think if you include liability reform, I think McConnell will come to the table and vote for state aid. So I think that's a quick, easy vote to get, 80 plus votes. I think there's an infrastructure package that, if it's not super green and, in the eyes of Republicans, needlessly expensive, if it's more focused on actual bridges and roads and less kind of green initiatives, I think you could get 80 votes for an infrastructure package too. Passing legislation takes time. I think, each of these bills could take a month or two to really get ready. So, that takes you into like June or July almost by the time you kind of get all these packages, where they should be if they're going to move smoothly with 80 votes. If they're going to be partisan, if there's going to be talk about rolling back filibuster rules, if there's going to be tiebreaker votes, that adds time to all of this. McConnell has a lot of tools. The Senate was not built to move fast, and he can certainly delay things if he's not pleased with the process. So I think it's in the country's best interest. I think McConnell, Schumer, Pelosi, McCarthy, and Biden will all agree that coming together is a better look right now than starting out 2021 with more partisan fighting. Personally,
yeah, I agree with you, Sam. I think that we see all this pressure from the left that we heard about prior to the election, but at the end of the day, this is the card that's been dealt. We have 50-50 Senate. The committees will probably be divided. You're going to still have to get 60 votes unless they change the rules. We have some pressure points coming up here in March with a lot of the, COVID relief measures expiring that we just passed here a couple days ago in December. We have a debt ceiling suspension that'll end. the summer, but will probably bleed into the fall. And that's usually when it's paired up with government funding deadlines. So I think Sam's absolutely right. I think that there's some areas of agreement. We've seen it with all of these COVID packages. It's a long slog on negotiations, but at the end of the day, these things get 90+ votes in the Senate and a good chunk of House Republicans with Democrats. I think if things start bogging down, I think you'll start hearing a little bit more about reconciliation, which is how they passed the Jobs Cuts, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act with Republicans, where you can just do it with 51 votes. But that's not a great look right out of the gate. They may start the process, but I think that's sort of their backup if they want to tackle some spending issues like healthcare and other tax reforms.
And Scott, COVID relief, is there any concern that because of the time, we've talked about time as a precious commodity, you've talked about time as a precious commodity on the Senate floor, because of the time required for that, that might take the air out of the sails of some of these infrastructure or healthcare bills, these larger bills? Or do you think that some of these can work in parallel?
No, I definitely think, like Sam mentioned, infrastructure could work in parallel. I think that's just when we talk about COVID stimulus, there's certainly that aspect of you got to get money to schools, you got to get it to healthcare facilities, you got to get it at vaccine distribution. But then there's just an overall economic stimulus that's needed out there. I mean, we've certainly needed the infrastructure stimulus for years. And unfortunately, an agreement never kind of came together because the parties couldn't agree. But I think that type of infrastructure measures could be included. Now, healthcare, I think, is a totally different beast. That's when you start getting political, and that's when they would kind of fall back to other measures where Republicans may not be as cooperative.
Okay. Interesting. So I guess if we start to move into the actual, legislation here, and with the turnover in the Senate, with obviously the results of the Georgia elections earlier this week, who become the big influencers in Washington that people should really pay attention to? Is it these new, more moderate, more visible voices on both sides? Have the power really shifted that much? What should people pay attention to in the media?
So it sounds boring, and the press spends a lot of time talking about these moderate kind of gangs that like to come together and talk about bridging the gap and putting together proposals. But Congress spends almost all of its time and energy organizing in a way to deal with all sorts of issues. They have committees, they have staff. These gangs very often lack the infrastructure that's needed to actually get 60 votes for anything. There's a committee process. If the gang bypasses the committee process, by default, it upsets the committee members. They feel like, why would I be on the infrastructure committee if a gang of 8 moderates is going to tell me what needs to be in an infrastructure bill? And you could just kind of use that mentality across the board. So the gangs disrupt the process that all of the structure is built around. The other thing I think that you kind of keep in mind is just how good of a relationship the leaders have with all of their members. Mitch McConnell and Susan Collins couldn't be closer. So Susan Collins, it's not in her business plan to go out and surprise Mitch McConnell. Now, if she can help Mitch McConnell by saying she's for something and move the ball forward, Mitch McConnell will tell her to go out and do it. And it doesn't sound right. He doesn't tell her to do anything, but they work together because they have a lot of trust built up. I think the media likes talking about these renegade senators that they believe will, lead the country in a direction that's more moderate. The fact of the matter is the U.S. Senate Democratic Caucus is pretty liberal, and they're not going to take their marching orders from Joe Manchin. They didn't elect him to be anything. They didn't want him to be in charge of stuff. So he's not. Schumer is. Now, Manchin and Schumer have a good relationship, and I'm sure that they can work together in ways to, get the country moving in a better direction. And that's the case on the Republican side.
Yeah, and I'll just sort of add on to what Sam's sort of mentioning is to keep in mind, Speaker Pelosi has one of the slimmest majorities that's ever occurred in the House. Same thing. We've only seen in the Senate a 50-50 split twice before. So the idea that things are going to be jammed through, and like they were, last couple of years, is just not going to be the case. Any big package is going to have Republican influence from Leader McConnell and Leader McCarthy, and the Democrats are going to have to negotiate if they want to get the 60 votes in the Senate. I think also just keep in mind is there's, as Sam's sort of mentioning, there's a process. The committee chairs are still going to be in charge of all the policy. They're going to be tasked with, trying to figure it out quickly and what their agendas are going to be. But in the finance committee, you're going to have Senator Wyden and Senator Crapo. The northwestern part of the U.S. is going to be very influential here. And then Ways and Means, for tax. In healthcare, you have Representative Neal and Kevin Brady. It's the same process. You have to come up with your agenda. You have to get up there and tell your story. And I think that that's what people are going to have to do, both through communications and advocacy here, as these packages are kind of coming together. So the players all remain the same. It's just going to be amplified. And the last thing I'll say is obviously Leader McConnell has had a strong relationship with President-elect Biden from their Senate days. So they've cut deals in the past. They know one another. They know what they can and they can't do. So I think that that'll be something to watch, is their relationship.
So if we move there from the kind of people inside, our elected officials, right, inside politics, to the people who are influencing politics, a lot of, especially in the middle market, what businesses see are the policies that are advocated for by industries that they're related to. So when we think of big tech, big oil, big pharma, how are the influencers around Washington changing the legislative agenda? And are there any sort of, shifts in how that agenda is being influenced?
Yeah, I think, there was an old conventional wisdom that is no longer accurate. And it was that, these big players in those industries have all the money, have all the politicians, have the relationships, have the ability to get what they want. And I think, in the last, 10, 15 years, media outlets have become much more nimble. You have this choose your own news kind of, way of receiving things, whether it's on Facebook, social media. Media outlets are more prolific. And
yeah, and Sam, I think we've both witnessed this, and I think that the era of backroom deals, of sort of the, hey, I know you on a one-on-one level, let's make something happen. Those days are done. Now it's all about building coalitions, making sure that there's like-minded individuals and businesses pushing together. You have to develop a cause now. You have to get out there with communications, and that's something that I know that's really big with our firm. And as Sam mentioned, we have a great communications part of the firm that partners with the advocacy to get that message out. Because if you don't have the communications aspect of it, you're really fighting upstream. So the times have changed. We know Twitter and all the protests that are out there, it certainly amplifies things. Sometimes people ask us, how can a member vote that way? Why would they do that? You have to realize these people are human. They're just like you and I. They have self-interest. Sometimes they're high-minded and think that they know better than some other folks. Sometimes they have to face the political realities back home. But that's kind of the new era that we mentioned that Sam's talking about, and that's kind of what we're dealing with at these times.
So I think it's how predictable the schedule is going to be, right? But if we look at 21 from a timeline standpoint, what do we think sort of especially with COVID relief and the vaccine getting rolled out and some other really major high impact events that'll probably happen? What do we think from a timeline perspective? When are we going to see the Biden administration start to push their major agenda items through, and what are going to be some of those flashpoints that happen between now and the end of the year?
I'll start off on that one. I think Biden's been a little bit quiet, mostly I think because of Georgia. He wanted to make sure that those races got resolved and didn't want to throw too much out. So I think you'll start seeing a little bit more about the first 100 days coming out here. As we talked about at the beginning there, Steve, COVID's going to dominate. You have to get everything back on track. We talked a little bit about infrastructure. Some other things that I think people need to think about, climate change. That's an issue that Democrats have been talking about for a long time. I don't think, even though that's tight numbers, I think that that's going to be an issue that comes up eventually. I think you're going to see justice reform legislation. I think immigration at some point is going to be coming back. Now, those are going to be contentious items. So as we talked about at the beginning, you got to see what is doable and move that as quickly as possible, because you only have a short window here. We start getting an election season very quickly these days. 10 years ago, you maybe had a year and a half. Last couple of years, it's definitely been you have a year. Maybe it even tightens up to maybe we get to the summer here with the political realities of the Senate, being so tight. There's a lot of races that are coming up there. And certainly we saw with the House, Republicans made significant gains on that. So in reality, I feel as though the next 6 months are going to be critical, and Democrats are going to realize that and are going to move as quickly as possible.
And how much of the agenda do you think you're going to be able to push through in 6 months? Are we looking at a couple of big items, one big item?
Well, the thing that trips every president up are these unforeseen, moments that create animosity, and it's out of their control. That make progress or democratic ability to push through partisan items very difficult. So, I wish I could tell you that it's going to be, really, really pleasant over the next 6 or 9 months, and that Biden's going to be able to do these things with 85 votes in the Senate and some Republican cooperation in the House, and we'll have these big bill signings in the Rose Garden. But that's not how it works. So,
and when does the window start to close? I mean, 2022 looks like it's probably going to be another contentious political year, right? So when does the window start closing on 21 and we kind of move back into, Scott, to your point, election season?
Yeah, I definitely think you're going to have a lot of your ideas and proposals out there by the summer. And then, as I mentioned, you have government funding at the end of the year. So I think that as far as what's going to be political reality is going to be by the summer, and then the logistics of some of them actually being fulfilled could slip toward the fall. But Steve, you've probably heard me say this. The most precious commodity in the United States is not gold or money. It's Senate floor time. As Sam mentioned, it takes a long process to get bills through the Senate. The House, they can crank it out in a couple days and it's through. But with the Senate, you have to pick and choose what is doable, because it takes 2, 3, 4, weeks sometimes to figure these out. And if you're going to throw a bill that doesn't have 60 votes, that doesn't have Republican support or potential support, then you're just doing political exercises. So that's going to be what faces, I think, a lot of the leadership, the new leadership in the Senate and the White House, is what can we put down on the floor, and especially the first 3 months, and make sure that we have the votes and get wins on the board. Because if you get a couple losses, it's hard to bring it back.
So I've had a couple of questions come in. So one is, can you guys, to what degree can you speculate on whether we'll see changes in the tax code, either on a bipartisan basis or in the event that Democrats opt for their budget reconciliation route?
No, that's a great question. So I think obviously anything that's non-reconciliation is going to be very tough. I don't think Republicans, they have some tax changes that they'd like to make from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, but we've never found any compromise the last 2 years on those. Now, it all does come down to reconciliation and what kind of spending occurs there, because I think with any big spending package, the potential is we need to pay for it. How are we going to, if it's healthcare reform, if it's new green energy tax credits, you're going to look and you're going to say, well, what industries are we not liking? What are we incentivizing that Republicans did and we're not in favor of? So I definitely think, the Biden administration, they put out during the campaign that they want to raise corporate tax rates, from 21% to 28%. They'd love to get rid of the SALT deduction. They'd love to repeal parts of the Republican tax cuts. there's not specifics out there. I'm not going to claim to know, which industry is targeted. But I think everyone's going to have to pay close attention to, if you hear a big package that's going to cost a lot of money, there's going to be that discussion about, okay, what other policies can we do to offset that? And often that's what's most recently been done.
I'll say that.
Yeah, and I'll just say on the antitrust, I absolutely think that what you started to see a little bit at the end of the Trump administration is going to continue. I don't think there's going to be any free passes out there, no matter Democrat or Republican. Look, I think that Republicans, we saw the 230 debate at the end of the year. I don't think that's going away. And I think that, we talked about it very briefly, but anytime you're big, you're going to be a target. You're going to be hauled up for congressional hearings. I think if you're going to do mergers and acquisitions, I don't think you're going to get any free passes, either on the Hill or in the agencies that are going to be reviewing it. It's going to be a tough fight. Now, I think that it's just going to be very interesting. And as Sam is saying, I see what's happening just continuing for the foreseeable future.
Well, that's great, guys. Thanks a lot. Very much appreciate you joining today, Sam and Scott. I have your email addresses up on the screen. If there are further questions or anybody wants to understand from an advocacy or a strategic communications perspective how to get involved, definitely feel free to reach out. This will be posted as a recording probably by Monday and available on our website as well as through LinkedIn. So if there's any colleagues or contacts that you have out there who would appreciate the content that we talked about today, please feel free to send this to them. We will follow up in an email with everybody with the link to that, the link to our newsletter, as well as the contact information of the folks on the call. Next week, January 14th, we are doing a refresh on forecasting best practices for 2021. And then the week after that, on January 21st, we're going to do a spotlight on buy-side due diligence for anybody looking to do acquisitions this year. So please bookmark those in your calendar if you're interested. Other than that, hope everybody has a great week. Thanks very much for joining, and hope everybody is set up for a successful and happy and healthy 2021.